Welcome back. We're discussing Islamophobia in Europe and the fallout from the shooting deaths at the French satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo. Someone who's done extensive work on this topic in Europe is Ambassador Akbar Ahmed. He is the former Pakistani ambassador to the United Kingdom and Ireland, and he joins us here in the studio. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You were a member of a commission in Britain that looked into the rise of anti-Semitism and also the rise of Islamophobia back in the 1990s.
Yes.
Did you find at that point some similarities between the two?
Similarity, Anand, in the sense that any minority that is demonized by a majority will sooner or later result in violence targeted against the minority, prejudice, hatred, and ultimately, as you saw in Europe in the last century, in the middle of this century, the rise of the Nazis and the Holocaust, you have violence on a mass scale. Now, in order to avoid that, we need to avoid going down that road. And what I discovered, I knew very little about the Jewish community and their history, that so much of what I was finding in the anti-Semitic commission was in fact familiar territory to me, because Muslims are feeling the same in Europe in the 1990s. There wasn't too much of it, but it was there, it was quite evident. And again, we fast forward to 9/11, then all the events taking place in Europe, to Paris, the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and then the reaction and backlash against the community. And you are seeing mosques being attacked, women, individual women wearing the hijab being attacked. All this is dangerous because this can again lead down a very, very frightening path. As a counter to this, we must also give some good news. We also have been meeting, and I've been working with some remarkable spiritual leaders, political leaders, Archbishop of Canterbury, Grand Muftis, chief rabbis. They're also very active in trying to promote interfaith dialogue. So you're seeing two contradictory movements taking place. One where there's hatred against a minority, in this case Islamophobia, meaning Muslims, a slippery slope because today it's Muslims, tomorrow it's another community, and interfaith initiatives.
So we've seen anti-Semitism, which was on the rise, as you point out, in the first half of the last century, and we've seen efforts, very good efforts that have been made to counter that. So in a sense, when we look at Islamophobia right now, is it the new anti-Semitism in a sense?
A lot of people, in fact, would call it that. In fact, the big lecture I gave in the 1990s at the synagogue, one of the first Muslims to be invited to talk at the synagogue, was precisely that, looking at Islamophobia as the other side of the coin of anti-Semitism. So I was arguing that it's different, and yet there's so many elements that are similar, and just cautioning people. And again, I got a very, very positive response from both the Jewish community and the Muslim community, that we need to be tackling this kind of phobia because it does not promote harmony in society.
When you say tackling this kind of phobia, I mean, where does one start?
Many steps to be taken, and perhaps the most practical and urgent step in Europe, I'm just coming from Europe as a result of my fieldwork, is a closer coordination between administration, security agencies in particular, and Muslim leadership. Now, right now, there is some attempt being made, but it is not very well coordinated. So the administration, for example, has very little idea about the community. Who are its religious leaders? Who are its social leaders? Who are its political leaders? Who is, in short, guiding these youngsters, 15, 16-year-old girls going out of Scotland or England and going off to join ISIS? Who is guiding them, or rather misguiding them? So these questions need to be answered. They can only be answered if there's coordination. You also need to tackle the anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and so on, which is rising because there's a connection between the two in Europe right now. You also need to be aware of the Islamophobia in the media. There's a constant stream of Islamophobic commentary and images coming out of the media. And that builds up a picture in the minds of the majority population, who begin to say, is my doctor, who is a Muslim, is he sympathetic to these terrorists? Is my neighbor potentially a terrorist? And you suddenly have a spread of fear, which is not real. It's imagined, but it's there.
You've done something that not many people have done, and you just talked about it a moment ago when you said that you carried out field work. That meant going out into the field, talking to ordinary Muslims, talking to Muslim leaders, talking to political leaders, etc. You've written extensively about it. There's, I think, 4 studies that you've done on this. What were the main messages that you heard from the people that you talked to?
The main messages, Anand, I would say this, very encouraging. I had a team, wonderful team with me. We talked to, as I said, chief rabbis, grand muftis, archbishop of Canterbury, ordinary people, extreme right-wing people, so the whole range of opinion. So very encouraging that there is consciousness that there is a crisis, it needs to be tackled. Very discouraging because I also felt that the coordination without which you cannot solve this problem, it's a huge problem and it's going to grow, it's not going to disappear. That coordination still doesn't really exist. So a lot of Europeans are reacting, unfortunately, in a kind of knee-jerk way. Charlie Hebdo, Paris, the terrible deaths there, Copenhagen. So people are saying, this is our 9/11, we must now go for the solution, but primarily through the security prism. Now that is one reaction. The other reaction has to be cultural, diplomatic, educational. Without it, you're not really solving the problem why Islamophobia grows in the first place. We need to understand there is a problem there. We need to tackle the problem. For example, Anand, let me tell you, we visited Marseille, which is one of the great port cities of Europe and France's second city. 30% of the population is Muslim, Algerian, basically the North African colony that France had. So imagine the size of the population. Now, you would expect 30% of the population of Marseille to have a central mosque where they gather, where the leader, religious leader, the social leader can then guide them, tell the youngsters, this is how you must behave or not behave in this country called France. They don't have a central mosque. So the impact of that socially, for me as a scholar looking at France, is going to be huge because there is no central point where you can communicate ideas to the community. In Athens, they don't have a mosque. There's no mosque in Athens. It's a source of controversy even today. So there are many things that local administration, the French in France, the Greeks in Greece can do to work much more closely with the Muslims. So there are structures in place. So if there's a crisis, they're able to deal with it.
So in the absence of mosques, as you point out, in places like France or Greece or wherever it may be, are youngsters then becoming susceptible to more radical elements?
Again, excellent question, because I would say the short answer, in cases of people who are going to join the fighting in the Middle East, and don't forget something like 5,000 have gone. This is a huge number, Anand. I mean, you ask yourself, where is the failure? Is it the failure of the families, their culture, their religion, Islam in this case? Is it the failure of the Western country in which they're living? There have been massive failures here. So I would say the teachers, the people who are influencing them are, again, failing in their attempts to persuade them that they have to live there, citizens of this new country. They're born, remember, a lot of these youngsters are locals. They're born there, they have passports, and yet they're going across. They are not following the path of the Sufis or the scholars of Islam or the modernists who are bringing a vision of Islam, but in fact they're following very often these radicals they find online, and the radicals, of course, are preaching a very clear message, which they find attractive, and they find themselves very soon in the turmoil in the Middle East.
All right, very quickly, Ambassador, I've got a few seconds. Why laws in Europe against anti-Semitism, and that's what should be done, but not against Islamophobia? Again,
a great question, and this question is going to be debated. It's going to be a big question for Europe in the future, and it needs to be answered.
I'm going to have to leave it there. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us. And that's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at cctv_America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.